So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever your time zone is, and thank you very much for joining us today and taking the time to be here with us today. So I really would love to start with, a simple idea, and I think it sits in the heart of leadership today. So I think when people feel that they matter, they act like they matter
Mhm.
and they contribute more, they take ownership, and they engage with the challenges in a very smarter and different way. And when that feeling is missing, we see hesitation, we see silence, and a tendency to step back at those moments where engagement is very much needed. And I think the leaders who consistently get the best out of their team can get that. And they understand this dynamic very well because they create the space for people to think, to contribute, and to take ownership. So they step in when the support is needed and they step out when it's not. And that balance really is not accidental. It's actually built through how we engage in conversations, especially when uncertainty is present, and it always does. So, from a strategic risk perspective, I think this becomes very critical. Risk rarely disappears, and they either get serviced and worked with, or they stays hidden and they affect decisions in ways that are harder to see later on. So the difference really often comes down to the quality of thinking inside, inside the conversations that we're having with our teams. And this is where coaching becomes really a leadership capability, not an optional skill, not a soft skill anymore. Coaching really can shape how people think, how we approach uncertainty, and how, most importantly, make decisions when the path forward is not clear. And that's exactly why we are pleased to have this conversation today with Bill Tingle. Bill brings a combination of experience that I think very relevant to our discussion today. He has operated at the executive level at multiple roles in different industries, such as healthcare, logistics, and transportation, to lead large scale environments with significant responsibility and impact. The most important thing that today his work is focused on coaching and coaching to senior leaders. He works closely with directors, vice presidents, and C suite executives on executive presence, communication, and leading with clarity under pressure. And through that work, he has coached probably more than 200 leaders to help them navigate the exact moments that we're talking about, where thinking, communication, and most importantly, decision making is really important. And at the core of his leadership, there is very simple and powerful belief that he shared with me. Strong leadership starts with precise language, emotional awareness, and honest conversations. Bill, thank you very much for being with us today. And thank you for accepting our invitation. And it's a pleasure to host you.
Thank you, Fayyad. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this. It was delightful to meet you finally face to face over Zoom. We've been interacting on LinkedIn, and it's just a treat and an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is ours. And I think just to kickstart here, leadership expectations, have evolved in a very noticeable way, to be honest. Leaders nowadays are expected to make decisions faster, and often and most of the time with incomplete information
Mhm.
and under increasing visibility. And in those conditions, experience and technical capability are still important, yet they don't always translate into clarity at that moment. So, from your experience, with working with leaders in those environments, what has changed in leadership expectations over the past few years? And why does uncertainty tend to reveal gaps in how people think?
Yeah, the world we know has just become more and more complex. I mean, even over the past 20 years, it's accelerated and become more and more complex, more and more chaotic, more and more sophisticated. And then with clearly with AI, and all the talk about AI over the last couple of years, it's become even more so, more accelerated in terms of the complexity and the uncertainty. And I think especially in this technology field, leaders are expected to rise up in the midst of that uncertainty, um, because they're the ones that are counted on to have that knowledge and have that awareness. But what I think is historically, leadership has relied on methods, practices, tips, techniques. Here are the things you do. And when when the environment and the market and technology and business is changing rapidly, the tips and techniques and things that we're used to doing can quickly become irrelevant, not as useful, maybe not as applicable. And so, what we work with is helping people become better observers of what's going on as a human being, like noticing what's going on in conversation with other people, what's going on, and then designing new actions, designing for the moment, designing actions with our language, with our emotions to create the results that we want. And then last thing I'll toss out so that we can keep going is there's second order learning, which is people talk about fail fast. It's okay to fail fast. Well, part of that as a human is designing our actions, seeing our results, and then very quickly going back based on our results, who we are as an observer. So we might want to shift our observations. So in the midst of this uncertainty, we're always going back to our observations and observing and looking at what's going on, and that can contribute to fulfilling those expectations that people have on leaders.
That's really a very important point, and I think it connects directly really to what leaders experience in real moments. And to your point, and when uncertainty increases, thinking doesn't always stay stable, right? Even for experienced leaders, they can find, themselves hesitating, revisiting decisions, or even delaying conversations that we would normally handle with confidence. So from your experience, and I want to use, your coaching lens, what tends to happen to leaders internally when pressure, start to build?
Yeah, I think leaders, or people as humans, care about their status, how they show up. They care about the consequences of their actions. And as a human, we want certainty. And when we don't experience certainty or we experience uncertainty, our human nervous system gets triggered, and we can get triggered into a threat. And then with the threat, we can withdraw, we can shut down, we can you would get stuck in all of that. And so the first step is noticing that I'm experiencing this threat, and then looking at, well, what's the story behind here? What's true? What's my assessment? Because so oftentimes, Fayad, people are making ungrounded assessments. We're thinking and we're jumping to conclusions. We're making assessments of situations, and we're not asking, well, where's the evidence? Where's the truth? And this happens a lot with people. And so if we can notice what's happening with our body, notice what's happening with our threat, our brain, we can stop, make an assessment, what's really true, and we can shift into what I call a mood of wonder and curiosity and problem solving and creativity. So that's how we typically think in terms of working with uh, coachees.
Yeah. And to your point, we are in a complexity. And with complexity, as we know, we have less control and less certainty. And
Hmm.
that's where the adaptability comes to play here. So, from your perspective, what do we need to do, to do that shift, especially for leaders who are, otherwise very capable in stable conditions?
Yeah, I think first it's noticing it, noticing what's going on with the threat, the uncertainty, and again making an assessment, and then we're born to be creative, and so stepping out of that and saying, well, what do I care about, what are we trying to produce, what are we trying to create, and begin designing actions to lead us there. And again, if we can shift from a mood of worry or fear or confusion to shift into a mood of curiosity and wonder and begin to design actions into that direction, we'll be far better off.
Brilliant. And I think if we want to, now get into, some coaching technicality, we can notice that there is noticeable difference between, giving directions and helping, someone see a situation, more clearly. I think many leaders are comfortable providing answers.
Mm,
Yet, fewer are comfortable creating the kind of conversation that
mhm.
allow the other person to think for themselves. So, from your perspective, what does coaching look like in a real leadership moment?
Yeah. Well, first of all, coaching is not telling. It's not giving direction. Coaching is about partnering with the coachee. And so coachee could be a client, but it could be in the corporate environment, in a business environment. A manager is acting as a coach in that moment with a subordinate who could be a coachee. And it's an invitation to partner and to co-create and to begin with from a place of care. I like what you said at the very beginning about um, demonstrating care. These are my words, demonstrating care and helping people see their value and how they fit in. So if we can begin with care, how we see their value, how they fit in, the importance of what they're doing, and then partnering with them and inviting them to be into a conversation where the coach is asking more questions than making statements. So coaching is really an invitation to inquire, ask questions, help the coachee notice what's going on around them, notice what's going on in their body and their thinking and their moods and their emotions, and invite them to go along that journey. But the discovery is inside the coachee because we see that people have a wisdom inside them, and when people are telling them what to do, they're just responding to what to do. But if we invite people to think about the situation, what are we trying to do? What do we care about? What is your role? What is your commitment? And we're asking questions, then they can pull from their wisdom and create, and then they own it more. I mean, I've
Mm.
seen so many times in a leadership role when I don't tell somebody what to do, but I invite them and I partner with them and kind of lead them, and they come up with the answer. It's a far better answer, and they own it much more.
Yeah, and I'm very sure you've worked with many leaders. What's your experience with leaders who are, hesitant, avoiding the decision, or not seeing, the situation clearly? So how do you approach that conversation?
Yeah, usually it starts with questions around, first of all, what are you committed to produce? Leaders have a commitment to create, to deliver something. And so in inviting them into a conversation around, well, what's the situation? What is your commitment? And then getting into questions around, what's the story that you're holding about this? It might even be, what are you afraid of? There could be an underlying story that they were punished a long time ago for doing something, and this feels like that, and they don't want to get punished again. or they're afraid they're going to fail because in the past they had some experience of failure and it's just hurts. And so there's almost always a story underneath. Why is somebody stuck? Why are they hesitating? And I think coach can help them tap into that story and like unleash it and break free from it and then invent a new story about where they're going to go in the future. And then making a commitment. One thing that I don't want to talk too much about unless you want to, that is at the heart of what I do. And it, as human beings, you mentioned it at the beginning, which I appreciate that. As human beings, we live in language, we live in emotions and moods, and we have this body that we're in. And in times of rapid change, when people are behaving a certain way, they're acting a certain way, they're feeling a certain way, we can almost always fundamentally get down to one of those three, like the three of those things. Like, what's the story that you're telling yourself? What's the story that you're telling other people? How is it showing up in a mood and emotion? Because if somebody is fearful, afraid, scared, that's an emotion that closes down them and their possibility to do anything. And so oftentimes when we're working with people, we're working with their emotions, their moods, which go together. They're not the same thing, but emotions and moods go together. What the story that they're telling themselves and those moods, emotions, and story, and then how is that showing up in your body? Which sometimes people are barely breathing, which then shuts down the brain, right? So, but anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about that because that's kind of at the heart and foundation of a lot of my answers and how I work with coaches.
Brilliant. And I think that will take me to, the linkage between, coaching and decision quality. As leaders and decision makers, we are as good as our last decision. So decisions really are often evaluated based on outcomes, but yet they are shaped way long before that, in
Mhm.
how the situation is understood, primed, and framed. So, from your perspective, how does coaching influence the quality of decision leaders do make?
Mhm. Couple things there. One is we want to make decisions with having the most information possible. And it's helpful to have other people kind of provide inputs and participate in decision making. But decision making is always based on an assessment. We assess the situation and then we make a decision and we go and we accept the consequences of whatever that might be. And so we always balance time, in coaching people, helping them think about the horizon of time. How much time do I have to make this decision? What's the consequence and the risk of this decision? And how much information do I have? And do I have enough to make a well-grounded assessment to make a well-grounded decision and go forward? And when people, there's situations, I've been in situations, I'm sure you've been in situations where you don't have much time and it's a high consequence situation, but you got to make a decision. And that's where really relaxing and trusting yourself and drawing on your experience. We're humans are pattern recognizing creatures. So we can recognize a pattern, we can draw on our experience, we gather as much information we can, and if we have to make a decision, we make the decision, and the decision has to be made. Interestingly, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm fascinated by it, which is that we, as human beings, we have like neurons in our stomach. And we have, our gut contains hundreds of millions of neurons. I think it's called our second brain or ENS. And you hear people say, I made a gut decision, and I've had that moment where I can just feel it in my gut, like this is the right decision. And quite often it is, but all that has to come together. And I think one of the biggest things, and I'll close on that, is part of coaching is helping people get to a state of calm and clarity to make the best decision they have, knowing that you can always come back. Often you can come back and modify the decision if it was bad, but be calm, clear, and actually decide. Because a lot of times people are stuck and they won't even decide.
Yeah, and just to your point, I relate to the ambiguity that we're in now, especially the misinformation, malinformation, and information overload, where you don't recognize the information if it's fact or if it's something wrong with it. And that takes me to your point, the intuition, the gut feeling, the system one thinking, decision making. So how do you see leaders, are they good at balancing, analysis, intuition, and context in a way that leads to, more confidence decision? And is that part of coaching?
Yeah, it certainly is. I think it's really a continuum and a journey for people. I think people are always on this journey of improving their decision making and and acting with clarity. And I will often work with people who they're not thinking about the consequence, or they're not thinking about the horizon of time that they have to make the decision, or they're not getting help, which I think is often a thing. And I'm sure this is culture based, but there's so often times people aren't asking for help to make a decision. And the fact is that we all need help from each other. And certain decisions are more critical than others. And I think if a person's like reflecting in the moment and saying, do I have all the information? Are there people that I can pull in? Do I have time to pull those people in? How is this sitting with my gut, my intuition? Have I seen this pattern before? And then being willing to make the decision, which that takes courage. I think if something I've thought about often over the last couple of years is just how today, and as ambiguous and uncertain things are, how much courage is required to be a leader. And that's why a lot of people end up getting out of it, because it takes a lot of courage, and the courage can go along with decision making.
Yeah. And leaders, there's a saying, you are only a leader if you produce another leader. So it's a cumulative thing. You work on yourself and you try to influence others. And I think that's what makes, leadership is a people business, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
if we wanna, tie it back to teams and the team dynamics, teams respond differently, depend on how they are led. So in some environments risk is avoided or left unspoken, unfortunately, but in others it's surfaced and discussed and walked through. So from your perspective, what changes, in a team when leaders adapt, a coaching approach and his style of management?
Yeah, you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, I believe, which was really good. And there can be such a shift in teams when you begin to coach them. And I've experienced for myself where I was actually during my tenure to become a CIO, a couple of occasions. I'd already been studying coaching. And like we said, coaching is different than mentoring, which is different than advising. And in the coaching space, it's very much a servant leadership and coaching go really nice together. I mean, anybody that has a coaching style has tendency to be more of a servant. And that style comes with care. And when employees feel cared for, genuinely, authentically cared for, they 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 open up and they feel safe, and they have the opportunity to flourish. And so when we operate with a coaching model, like a coaching frame, when we're working within teams, um, and it takes time, of course, we give each person their space to flourish. We give each person space to create and to bring their wisdom and their knowledge and participate. And a big part of a coach is a team coaching is making sure everybody has their space. And if somebody's squishing or um, um, suppressing another person, then the coach steps in and invites that person to enter in as a team, to not behave that way. And so coaching is very much an invitation and a partnership, whether it's one or a team for everyone to feel cared for, valued, know how they fit in, and flourish alone and as a team for the sake of an organization.
So brilliant. And I think that that leads me to a very important question. So what signals as leaders, need to look for that shows that this team is moving from holding back to actively contributing?
Yeah, I think if I understand your question, it's noticing, it's being in proximity, so that you can notice and make observations. You can ask the team for their assessments. You can look at the outcomes. You can look at the results. Um, you know, I've been fortunate to be part of some really transformative organizational cultures. And there was one where we went from everybody pointing their finger at each other, blaming, and even sabotaging. I hate to say that. And when we started working together as a team where we listened to each other, we cared for each other. And one of the big moves that I made, and I actually, it's part of my coaching program now, is in a section on building high performing teams. Um, I have a practice of making commitments, and everybody on the team first needs to know what a commitment means. Two, they make different commitments. We make a commitment to supporting one another. We make a commitment to doing excellent work. We make a commitment to like there could be like 10 commitments. And if you say, well, this is our culture, these are the behaviors, values, norms of our culture on our team, and okay, we agree on that. Now we make a commitment to those. And if somebody's not acting that way, hey, wait a minute, this isn't consistent with what we said, and we make it safe. It's safe to say, hey, this behavior is not what we talked about. This isn't our commitment. And I remember years ago reading Patrick Lencioni's Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and there were moments I kind of felt like we had gotten there, like a really functional team.
Yeah. So if we want to, close the loop with few practical tips or advice. So what are few things our audience can start doing immediately to strengthen our ability to coach?
First of all, I think is to create number one, create a coaching mindset. Because coaching, it's easy to talk about like we do these things like, oh, I'm a coach, I'm gonna coach, or I'm a manager, I'm gonna manage. But I think first and foremost, it's key to say, well, what does coaching mean, and how does that differ from managing or mentoring? And so I think the first thing is recognizing that coaching is a partnership with the coachee to help them achieve everything that they want to achieve and make sure they hold themselves accountable. Now, a manager might hold them accountable. A true coach says you're accountable, you're responsible. You've got your goals, you've got your options. You're the one that has to make that decision. And then work with each person to help them fulfill their goals and their dreams, and et cetera. But don't, as a coach, try not to tell too much. Try to ask questions and make observations. I've had people where I make an observation of a employee who's a coachee, and I say, "Hey, I noticed you seem really sad. Like I'm checking in. Is everything okay?" And yeah, well, I've got this situation going on. And then we could talk about it in an appropriate way, because a negative a negative mood or emotion, they're shutting down. Like they're as leaders, as coaches, we have to set a mood, we have to set an emotion, but then we can notice others and we can help them shift theirs into a place where they're more open to being more productive and creative and that sort of thing. So I hope I didn't get off too far on that. If you want to maybe come back and ask another question around that.
Brilliant. I would love to open a space before we, close to the audience if they have any question. So let's see. Does anybody have a question?
Looks like we had one in the chat.
Already? Let's see. Question for Bill. What distinguishes organizations that successfully integrate coaching into their risk culture from those where it remains an isolated leadership activity? And what are the first steps to make that shift?
Let me see if I understand this one. Yeah, I think the first is depending on the person, Dr. Michael, if thinking about the culture and if it's appropriate, is establishing the distinction of coaching and say, oh, because like there's a lot of companies like, oh, we have a mentor program. Well, that's different than coaching. And so I think that can it can be helpful, first of all, to make a declaration, we're gonna bring coaching in. Two, describe what that means. Well, what does that mean? Three, then establish the relationships, like, well, who's coaching who? And then set up a cadence around a coaching arc, which is like, okay, what are our goals? Um, what's our cadence of getting together? The ground rules of coaching and helping with that. And then and doing it on a small scale. I think doing that on a small scale first, and then getting some feedback and helping people along. But I think it's really important that people understand what it means to coach, and then number two, that there's the competencies to do it.
Brilliant. Another question, holding other leaders in the organization to account can be tricky when you notice things are not as they should be in their area. Any tips on that?
Yeah, I believe I understand that one. It can be tricky, and I think it's somewhat situational, but I'll offer a thought on this one. Is I think this goes back to the example of, calling somebody out if they're not keeping their commitment to the culture or the behavior of the other. It can be very tricky, and I think it can be somewhat a cultural thing. But if we as a group agreed to do that, then number one, it's good to do it in private, not public, just like like with the philosophies of management. And two, um, approach it from um, a place of care. And so I could say it like this. I could say, hey, in private, I noticed in the meeting, you kept interrupting so and so. And we had agreed that we're going to let people kind of finish their sentences and talk. And so I really care about you and your success. And I just wanted you to know, like I think several people noticed it. And, I'm here to support you. And, if I do the same thing, let me know. But I think you're going to be much more successful if you let people finish your sentences. So I don't know if that was a good example, but if it comes from a place of number one, it's in private, if that's the situation. Number two, it's caring. I care about you and your career. I care about your situation. I'm sincere, and then I'm going to confront it. And now that would be one example. There's also other areas around, effective apologies and things like that.
Yeah. So another question from yours. Thank you for the interesting information. How would you divide uh, risk management into a set of personal characteristics, including leadership qualities, method and tools, including AI and organizational culture?
Is this risk management, like a risk management function? Fayad, can you help me with
Y-
like what's meant
y-
by that? Because I
you,
just want to make sure I want to make sure I
yeah.
don't go into like organizational design if that's what the question's about.
Yeah. Yours, if you want to come off mute and ask the question, we would love
Yeah, I'd love to help.
to hear. Yeah. Another question, Bill, to what extent do you make use of the principles versus frameworks? And are there any frameworks that you find particularly useful in coaching that you can briefly touch on?
Yeah, there's I'm accredited with the International Coaching Foundation, and there are that's a good website, ICF. I think it's ICF.org, and they provide coaching competencies, but then they provide it's called the arc of coaching, and so it's kind of the framework for setting up the conversation, establishing goals, working through listening, asking questions, and working through, and then coming to a closure. And at the end, there's a commitment the coachee makes a commitment to take action on it because it's all about action. And then the other thing is, this was helpful for me, is in a coaching conversation in that ICF arc of coaching, it's important to only have one goal at a time that you're working on. So it like if you go into a meeting with a coachee and you're talking about this goal and this thing and that thing, it's going to it's not going to have the clarity. And so always one at a time that you're talking about. Let's work on this. Okay, now let's work on this. And you could do more than one in one session. And then the second one is which it's a fundamental framework, but it's ontological coaching. That's where I studied. So I studied with Julio Oloya, a couple other people in the field of ontological design, and I started studying that 20 years ago, and it's just timeless from my perspective.
Yeah. So another question from Dr. Michael. From your experience at C-suite level, what are the most common unseen behaviors or biases that cause leaders to misjudge risk, and how can coaching effectively raise these behaviors or biases and correct them?
Yeah, I think one thing is like what the past is always a prediction of the future is one that I see a lot, and and then not staying current with the latest threats and risks. And so I think working with people to stay open and aware, to make observations, don't fall into patterns of past behaviors, but stay open, aware, fresh, um, keep observations constantly as a human, stay awake to those things, and then constantly making grounded assessments, as I said earlier.
Yeah. And I think even to your point, I think coaching can be like a bias management technique where,
Oh yeah.
you try to challenge, those biases. And funny enough, in meetings and all of that, people, when you talk first about biases, they tend to be unbiased. So with little tricks, we can correct, those biases.
Yeah,
So
one thing
yeah,
about
go ahead.
bias really quick is that, I talk a lot about, because I like to get it down to fundamental. I talk a lot about the stories that we're always running in our mind. Like we're talking all day. We talk to other people and we talk to ourselves most of the time. And so biases, there's always a story tied to a bias. And it's easy just like deep down to like lock into that story, and we're just telling it over and over again. And we're not pulling out and saying, well, wait a minute, I need to challenge this story. Let me make a new observation and a new assessment to see what's possible versus me locked onto this thing.
Yeah. So another question from Sam. Please suggest top three key takeaways the audience can think about to help positively implement within their work environment to improve the work culture.
I've always think of this in terms of as a leader, shaping culture is first of all, what do you want the culture to be? So uh, culture is values, beliefs, norms, how we're behaving. And as a leader, I always want to say, well, what should that look like? And then be in conversations with everybody. What do you think it should look like? Here's what I think it should look like. And then say, okay, I've heard everybody, here's the mental model of our culture and what we want. And we're going to all commit to that. And then we all, kind of catch everybody and make sure we're moving towards that culture. I like the part about safe is that's part of the culture. It's safe to say what you think. It's safe to make a request. It's safe to share your ideas. It's safe to, if somebody's not aligned, it's safe to say so. And the leader has to be very involved in that because the leader has to step in and handle situations where people are not acting in ways that are safe.
Yeah. So probably last question from Bill. How would you overcome when, as a senior leader, you model the behaviors of servant leadership, building safe environment for everyone to grow, but other senior leaders responsible for other departments do not model the right behaviors?
It's a really good question, and I've been in that before. Um, I I put my blinders on and we're gonna do the right thing. Like I'm gonna model servant leader behavior. Everybody that's in my organization, we're gonna model that. We're gonna take the high road and hopefully the results of what we're doing will influence others. But it's just not gonna serve me to serve no pun intended, it's not gonna serve me well to worry about the others or be impacted by the others. And like I've been in it before, I know there can be impact. But like I remember years ago, just real quick, is there was a leader, senior leader, who was just very toxic and not aligned with the values, and it was a peer of mine. And I was bothered by it. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. And I said, you know what? We're going to keep focused. We're going to keep our culture. We're not going to be affected by it. And at some point in time later in the future, that leader was let go. And I'm pretty sure that that leader was let go from the toxic behaviors that person was performing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bill, for your time. Any final thoughts before we finish?
For me, I would just say thank you for the opportunity to speak. I hope this was helpful in some way. It's sure a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I know we have people all over the world, which is it's just a wonderful thing to be here. And I think as a coach, I wanted to be a coach 20 years ago. I knew it because I hired a coach. I said, I'm going to do that. And so as a coach, I always think about the one person. And it's easy to think about all the people that we're going to coach. But quite frankly, there's always one person that I'm focused on. There's one person I want to make a difference. There's one person that I want them to feel like their life, their career was much better because I was part of it. And not from an ego, but from a existential thing. And so I think everybody can be a coach. Everybody can help a person rise to levels that they wouldn't have without that coach's involvement. And so I'd say, I just encourage everybody think like a coach, make a difference, and help somebody achieve their goals.